Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mariam Kazmi, and I am a member of the Youth Advisory Committee at CAIR Washington. And I'm here currently with Sahar Fathi, who will go ahead and introduce yourself. If you want to please offer a brief description of what you do in your position as the policy director for the Washington State Attorney General's office, that would be great. Like, why is your work important, and what impact does it make on others?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Mariam. It's really nice to meet you. I'm Sahar. I'm the policy director for the Attorney General's office, as Mariam said. It's lovely to be here. The policy team sort of supports the implementation of the Attorney General's policy priorities. So anything that the Attorney General wants to include as an initiative or a project, like legal assistance for veterans, opioids, data breaches, worker protection, hate crimes, immigrant and refugee issues, police reform, environmental justice, sexual assault, and then youth safety are sort of his major priorities, as well as those that are assigned to us by the legislature. And policy analysis, which I always think is helpful, I'm sure you all already know, but policy analysis is really, we are often given a problem, right? There's something going on in the system that's not working for everybody. How do we solve it? And so then the policy comes together with a lot of different stakeholders. We come together with lots of other experts, with advocacy organizations, with research folks, government agencies, and we bring everyone together and we do data analysis and we talk to everybody to get their input to how we could solve this problem. And then we provide recommendations about what that could look like. And it could be a new law, could be a new program, or even just a new policy. Our policy team also has two programs. So one is the Office of the Military and Veteran Legal Assistance, and we serve anybody who is in military service right now, or a vet across the state, as well as any of their family members. And then our other program is the Tip Line program, and that's for youth safety. We have 4 staff dedicated to creating a new program statewide for youth to be able to call into a hotline or a helpline and get the help they need. And yeah, like a lot of what we sometimes talk about when we talk about policy is to sort of just give it a little bit more of a concrete example. Let's say you have an idea. Let's say your idea is there needs to be a place where all youth can call if they need any help in the state. And it shouldn't be like 911, it should be their own dedicated place to call. So that's the idea. It's a great idea. Probably a bunch of youth came forward and came up with the idea. And then they come to the policy team and they say, okay, but what does it look like, right? Who gets to decide what that phone number is? Who gets to decide how to make that call happen? What is the programming? Do they get other services? What do youth actually need from that kind of call? How do we make sure that they feel safe when they call in? Should there be other languages? What is it about that helpline that we can make sure actually meets the needs of all the youth in the state? Because there's a lot of different kinds of youth, right? There are youth with disabilities, youth who maybe don't speak English as a first language, youth who are scared to talk to government. How do we get all of that into one phone line? And how do we make sure they know about it, right? Because how do you tell all the youth about this program? And so that is where policy did come together, and we wrote a report about what it could look like. We looked at all the different programs across the country. We talked to youth, and now the program staff are actually running a survey to understand what should it even be called, what would make you feel safe if you called it, and so forth. And that is a lot of the back end work before you see those programs.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. I'm so happy to have you here. So to kind of follow up, can you tell us a little bit more about your career path? How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so my family is Iranian. My parents came with the revolution in 1979. I was born and raised in the US, but I'm a dual citizen. And so we went back to Iran most summers. I wore a hijab, I did all the things, but then I would come back to the United States and be like a regular American girl. And it was a little bit of both. I say to a lot of folks, as typical for children of immigrants, right? Like in my world, and probably most of yours, if you're a child of immigrant or if you're an immigrant or whatever, I was given three options as a career. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, and that's it. That's fine. But I don't think I even for 1 second, even until college, knew what a policy director was. All I knew was that I need to be a lawyer because my science grades are not good enough to be anything else. I really have no other options here. So I went straight through. I went to law school. I got a master's in international studies. I thought that I was going to be an international human rights lawyer. And I went to the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And somewhere along the way, I realized that it wasn't the right fit. Like I was sitting there and we were listening in long trials. And I said, this is really righteous work, but I care more about how we got here to begin with. Like what caused the genocide? How do we rebuild this country after a genocide and make sure that it never happens again? So I got to go to Lyon in France, and I did like a special international comparative law program where we really looked at different kinds of causes of genocide. And then I came back to Seattle, and I realized that I really wanted to sort of rebuild systems. I had no idea what that meant. I created MILA, the Middle Eastern Legal Association of Washington, which is still in Washington State, with a few other attorneys. And then I created the first legal clinic in the country for anyone who was Middle Eastern. This was very post 9/11, but also, a lot of domestic violence issues and things like that. And the idea of that legal clinic was that you got somebody who spoke your language. A lot of these languages in our communities are harder to find in the legal space. And so we brought all those volunteer attorneys together, and they helped you for free for an hour consult to get the legal help you needed. And you will find out, as I did, that when you run a free legal clinic, you don't get a paycheck. And so I still needed to pay bills. So I asked a friend if she knew of any jobs, and she said, I heard the city of Seattle has a new council member, and I heard he's hiring. Why don't you apply? And so I did. I submitted my application. I, to this day, have no idea why he hired me. I had no experience in policy or politics or anything. I just had a law degree. But he did, and I got to work on criminal justice policy and homelessness policy in particular. Those were my two big areas for him. I created the first program for, vehicular residents, people who live in their cars, and I got to help with the proposal for the first Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs in our state. So I got to help write that legislation. Then I was very fortunate, and I got recruited to be the first analyst in that office. And I got to help create all of their different programs. So the first ethnic media program in the country, I staffed their Immigrant and Refugee Commission. And the other major program that I created was the Refugee Women's Institute, which was a program where we brought refugee women who had only been here for about 5 years or less with law officers, and with police officers. And we had the refugee women teach the officers about their culture, and we had the officers work with them to understand what happens when you call 911. And we measured for trust, and we found out that refugee trust went much higher up with law enforcement at the end of the program. And then the federal government gave us an award for innovation in government for that program. And I got recruited to go to another department called the Department of Neighborhoods and create the external engagement strategy for the whole city for underserved communities. So anybody who had never interacted with government before. Around then, I started teaching. I taught at Seattle University, and then I went to the University of Washington School of Law. So at night, I would teach racism in the law. And then I started to, really grow some programs at the Department of Neighborhoods, like a liaison program, which put people in community. It paid them $50 an hour to do outreach with the city. So we diverted a lot of city dollars into community. We created, we tripled this huge community, how to interact with government program. We had the Youth Commission, we had an ethnic media startup institution, and then I got to create, with a lot of community members, the first Washington African Media Association. And then the Muslim ban happened, and my family is Iranian, my family is Muslim. It really impacted me a lot. I was an attorney, one of the very few who spoke Farsi. And so I started going to the airport, SeaTac, at 4 a.m. before work to meet families who were impacted, who were getting stuck at the airport, and help explain what was going on and get them help and speak in Farsi, because not a lot of people spoke Farsi to them. And that was about the time where I realized that I wanted I wanted to go back to really making more of a direct impact in the world of policy. You know, the Muslim ban was very impactful for me. It was very hard to watch. So I left the city and I went to the county and I staffed homelessness and equity issues. I helped write the legislation for the first regional authority for homelessness. And then I got a call from a friend and she said, why don't you come meet some of my friends at the Attorney General's office? And I got to say, it was very much the honor of a lifetime to have them say, why don't you come be our policy director? I don't know how much you know, but the Attorney General Ferguson was the first Attorney General in the country to sue the Trump administration when the Muslim ban happened. He was the first person to stand up and say, this is not okay. And he led that lawsuit. And so I felt like I owed it to our communities, but also just like what an incredible privilege to work alongside him. So that is a little bit of how I got here.
That's quite a journey. Thank you so much again for sharing.
Too much.
No, that's amazing. You did really, really amazing work. So it's great to see where that all got you. So yeah. So our next question is, what's a project that you're currently working on in your position specifically? You kind of mentioned some previous projects that you did, so it would be great if you could also talk a little bit more about a current one as well.
Yeah, so the policy team is really busy right now. This is like the part of the year where we respond to all of the mandates that the legislature has given us. Right now, something that might be of interest to the folks that you are reaching through your social media channels, and I'll give a couple examples, but one might be that we are creating that youth helpline, the statewide youth helpline, and we just released some youth surveys yesterday, and there's like a raffle to win a gift card if you participate in this like very short survey and help us figure out what would make it safe. And so we're trying to get that out, and I can definitely maybe share that after the interview if that's of interest. Well, you know, a very typical way that we do policy is we might bring together a task force or a work group or an advisory and help us think through a major issue. So one major issue that you've probably heard about is missing murdered Indigenous women and people. It's a big crisis in our country. A lot of Indigenous women and people are going missing or are murdered, and they're not really like getting the attention they deserve. And so the community came together and asked the legislature for a task force in the Attorney General's office. We created that task force last year. It has lots of different tribes on it, lots of different police agencies, law enforcement, community agencies, urban Indigenous agencies. We brought them all together, and there's like a long list of things that we're trying to work through. And the task force since December has been meeting a lot to come together. I can't even tell you how many times they've met. It just seems like every other day they are like back together because this is such an important issue. And their first report is being released in 2 weeks. So that is pretty exciting for us. It'll be a really big deal. And there's a lot of really great recommendations that they've voted on. And anybody in the public can watch them vote. You know, they're all public meetings on TVW. And then like maybe just one other thing that might be helpful in sort of thinking all the different ways, right? Like we can create program solutions, we can write task force that create like legislative solutions. One of the other things sometimes that we can do from a policy perspective is issue like a policy guidance or policy statement. And so I'm sure a lot of folks that are working with you, but you know, we're very upset when the Supreme Court rescinded the Roe v. Wade decision and sort of overturned the right to abortion for many states. And so what we did is we said, we wrote a letter to our Washington State medical and pharmacy commissions, and we issued guidance to the public. We asked them to issue guidance to the public to say, look, if you are a doctor or a pharmacist and you're coming over to Washington State and you have something on your record that says that you provided reproductive or gender affirming care that would otherwise have been legal in our state, but in that state you got in trouble for it, we want to make sure that they know that they're safe here. And so that was like a very different way of looking at that problem and thinking about how we can make those policy statements and let people know what we stand for in the state.
Great. I'm super excited to see a lot of these programs that you're working on implemented. They sound really, really useful, right? Especially right now. Um, so we also wanted to ask, what's something you wish more people knew about legislation and just policy in general?
Yeah, this is so timely, right? The when the Muslim ban happened, and now recently with all the Supreme Court decisions, a lot of folks, myself included, are really disappointed in where we are in this country, right? We're disappointed that we're not standing up for the rights of every single person, that these institutions aren't delivering in a way that we thought were really symbolic of how our country should be towards different communities and people of color. And I've said to a lot of folks, particularly since the Supreme Court decisions, that yes, 100%, we lost a lot of rights that day. But that also, this isn't over, right? That this is that moment where policy and legislative solutions can really help, right? Where we can design a better system, where we can include people and voices that were never included the first time around. We can talk to them, we can talk to all of you, and we can see what a new democracy, what a new country really should look like. And that is what policy is, where you want to innovate, you want to problem solve, you want to work with the community to make a better world. That's where policy really shines. It's not a bunch of other things, right? It's the stuff that affects your life. It's the actual tools that we use to create the systems. And maybe like to give a more concrete example. So when I was at the city, we had the youth commission in one of my divisions, and it was a bunch of youth who were appointed by the mayor and council, and they were assigned to come up with priorities for youth and present them to council. And they decided that year, this was like maybe 5 or 6 years now, maybe even longer, I'm just gonna age myself, but it was a while ago that they decided, what we think is really a problem is how hard it is for youth to qualify for low-income Orca passes, bus passes in the city of Seattle. And they felt like, a lot of low-income youth really needed to not have to jump through a lot of different hoops. Youth were coming from different backgrounds. They might be coming from foster care. They might have different abilities. And so it was just, they felt like what they had seen their, unhoused youth, right? They felt like their colleagues were really struggling to get a bus pass. And so they worked together every month in these meetings, and they identified the problem. They talked to youth, they talked to each other because they were also stakeholders, and they came up with a solution. And they said, look, City of Seattle, what we think is that you should spend, about $1 million and just make Orca passes free for all youth in the City of Seattle. And they presented that to the council at a committee table, and the council asked them questions, and then the council took it up as an initiative and passed it. And so now in the City of Seattle, because of youth who worked on policy and who proposed a new policy, youth have the ability to get, free bus passes across the city. And I think that is like so emblematic of what policy is, right? You see a problem, you talk to the people who are the most impacted, and you find a solution that works for them. And then you talk to the elected officials and say, this is what our recommendation is. And then they do it and the world changes.
Yeah, thank you so much for that example. It really goes to show just the pure power of policy. So thank you so much.
And youth, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And honestly, kind of going off of youth, what advice do you have specifically for Muslim youth in Washington State? This can kind of just be general advice that you have from your experiences.
Yeah. So I grew up here. I have 2 kids, and I say this to them all the time, although one is only 10 months, but I still say this to her all the time. I say, everything you have earned. That you all are beautiful, you're special, you're strong, you're brilliant. And I think a lot of times the media doesn't do us a lot of favors, right? With the exception of Ms. Marvel, who I watch religiously. But with the exception of Ms. Marvel, right? Like a lot of times other communities here on TV, this community did this amazing thing, but how often do you really hear that about the Muslim community? Not a lot, right? And so my advice is, don't listen to people who say you can't do it. Don't let anyone tell you can't do it. Listen to your heart. Let it guide you. You can do anything that you want. You can belong in any space that matters to you, your family, your community. You belong. And too often this world, this country tells us you don't. And I think they're wrong. It's really critical right now for Muslims to be heard, for all communities of color to be heard, to be at the table. That is why all of this is happening, right? We weren't at the table before. The only way we create a system that includes all of us is to have all of us at the table. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You belong.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all needed to hear that. So that's amazing. And kind of our final question is how can Muslims, specifically Muslim youth, become involved in the kind of work that you do? Because it really is so impactful. So we're just really interested to know, how can we get involved?
Yeah, I have a few ideas. So the first is, I talked a little bit about the Youth Commission before. Almost every jurisdiction, a city, a county, have some kind of a version of a youth commission. Look yours up, get involved, get engaged, see if they have an opening, if that is a space where, it is like a very formal place where youth can provide policy solutions to their elected bodies. Another thing that I often say is, in every position I've ever been for years, people, like at least once a week, people email me and they say, we've never met, I read about your job, I think it's really cool, or I'd love to be your intern, or whatever. And they just email me, and they find me on LinkedIn, or they find my email address in a million different places publicly. And I've never said no. And if you don't want to talk to me, that's cool, because you just met me and heard all about me on here. But I'm pretty sure none of my colleagues have ever said no either, right? That is something where, you tell someone, hey, I think your job is cool and I want to do it one day, no matter how old you are, that sounds great. I would love to tell you about my job, and I would love to sit down. And you don't have to know what you want to be. I mean, you heard already, I had no idea what I wanted to be. You don't have to know all the right questions. You just want to sit down and learn a little bit, do it. Learn as much as you can from other people. And then I actually asked a friend of mine at work about this question. And she said, what I would say is that anybody can also sign up to testify before council and the legislature. And that is a really good point, right? Whenever anyone is coming up with a law in the legislature, at the state level, at the county council, at the city council level, all of that, if there's anything that you care about, you can call, you can testify, you can email, you can tell them what matters to you and why. And that is a way that you can get engaged right now. So if you see anything that impacts you at all, right? And you want to have, even right now for Tip Line, we have an advisory board. Those meetings are public. You want to come and testify, come. If there are other meetings, or if the meetings are in the middle of class and you can't come, write us an email, write other people an email. That is the whole point of government, is for us to hear you. So don't be afraid, and definitely reach out. You never know what could happen.
That was super helpful. So thank you so much. And yeah, it was really great having you today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come here and talk with us. This was amazing, hearing your story and all the advice that you have to give. Thank you.
Well, it was really lovely to meet you. You're so good at running interviews. What are you planning on doing after this when you graduate from school? Are you going to do actual journalism reporting? It seems like your skill set.
No, I actually, funny enough, I kind of wanted to go into law, so I probably will be. I want to go to criminal law, so it will be kind of interesting. This is actually really useful for me too, personally. So, because I kind of do similar things. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let us know if there's anything that you want to learn more about from the AG on the law side. I can always help out there too.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, I'll be in touch.
All right. Well, thank you.